Hello and welcome to All About Billings. We are a show dedicated to discovering the people that make Billings a great place to work and live. We will interview local business people, community leaders, artists, entertainers, and we will learn all about their successes, their failures, and their connection to Billings. I'm your host, Nancy Brook, broker and owner at Billings Best Real Estate. And today it is my pleasure to have as my guest, Kari Boiter. Now, Kari is the chair of the Citizen Police Advisory Board. And this is a volunteer board appointed by the mayor and the city council with a focus on public safety. And we are going to learn all about what Kari and the rest of the advisory group does and how they are helping our community. So welcome to the show, Kari.
Thanks for having me, Nancy.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you here, and I was really interested in learning about this group. Maybe I've been living under a rock, but I had no idea that there were citizens who are partnering with our police force. Maybe just in a nutshell, tell us what this is all about.
Yeah, so the City of Billings has several advisory boards, and there are two on policing. One is the Police Commission, which is really more about personnel matters. When there are issues that need to be appealed, they deal with that. The Citizen Police Advisory Board was developed just about 4 years ago now, and it was really to help police work with the community to make the city safer. What can we do to partner together to help make safety an issue that all of us are taking part in, instead of just relying on the police?
So what does that mean, just practically? So you're involved with the community and being that liaison between the community and the police. How does that work?
Well, so one of the things that we do is we meet every single month, now at the new City Hall in the 5th floor conference room, but that's a place where any citizen can come and voice their concerns, just like they can at a city council meeting, and then we can certainly dig into that a little bit more because we have access to the police in a different way than an average citizen might. So this is a direct door-to-door scenario where police and citizens can communicate, right? That's one thing. Another thing is that the city council themselves have assigned us 4 really key areas of focus that they wanted to have some sort of recommendations in.
Okay.
And those 4 areas are data collection and analysis. At the time this board was formed, the police were keeping a lot of that data in Excel spreadsheets, so that's one of the areas they wanted us to look at. They wanted us to look at community support and engagement. So again, how do we better partner police with community members who want to be involved to make the community safer? They asked us to look at crime prevention and diversion. So instead of only putting more officers on the street and trying to enforce our way out of the situation, how can we prevent crime and really divert people out of the system before it begins? And then also looking at workplace recruitment and retention. Specifically, Chief St. John really wanted some help recruiting female and Native American officers, and so we were asked to look into what might be able to be done in that area.
Well, let's go back to the first thing that you talked about. So if I, as a member of the community, have a concern, then I can come to this community advisory board and bring that concern. What sort of things would obviously, if it's an emergency, I'm going to call 911, but what sorts of things would come your way?
So for example, we've had a citizen who's come and spoken about neighborhood properties that might have drugs, substance use involved that they wanted some help with. We've had them come and talk about racial disparities and things that they wanted to have addressed there. One thing is that Chief St. John or one of his designees is at every single one of these meetings, so they really can answer questions directly. And if they don't have answers, this is where it starts and we can begin to look into these things.
So they contact you, or they're at these meetings, or both?
It's open to the public, so
Okay.
anyone can come. It's at 9 o'clock on the 4th Thursday of every month.
Okay.
It used to be in the 1st floor conference room at City Hall, but of course we've now moved to a new City Hall, so
Right.
it's now on the 5th floor in what's called the Rimrock Conference Room, where, near City Hall chambers, and it's open to the public. So really anyone, anytime, any concern can come in. Right at the beginning of the meeting, it's open to public comment, and then we can really begin a dialogue from there.
Okay, so I can come as your average citizen. Maybe I have a concern, abandoned cars in my neighborhood as an example, and I can come and say, hey, I've called and nobody does anything, and what can you guys help me with, because I don't think this is a good situation for our neighborhood. So, and then you would listen, and the police chief might have some answers, or you might need to come back with some response?
Yep, and that's a perfect example, right? So depending on the situation, sometimes it's code enforcement,
Sure.
and sometimes it's police. and those are two different roles. So we really work with the police, which involves when there's a person in the vehicle, isn't immobilized, right? It might be running, or an RV, something like that with an engine. There's some different criteria, right? But if I were a neighbor who were concerned, I could come in and the chief would tell me, here is why we can't get involved, or here is why we do want to be involved, and we will go take care of that today. Or sometimes it's something that a community service officer, the CSOs, can take care of. And maybe they just didn't realize it was an issue. But a lot of times it's really just a matter of not knowing where to go for the information, and this is a great first step. It's our government and we have to take part, and so if we come and we start that dialogue, we can really learn for ourselves where the proper channels are, and if it's not the police, we'll find out where to go.
Yeah, that really makes sense. I mean, even if you had like a suspicion, oh, I think there's something not right going on in this house, whether it's, there's drug activity or I see people coming night and day, might not be something you call 911 about, but you want to report a concern. Like that would be an example of something that you could come to a meeting and talk to the police chief about. Okay.
Absolutely. Or another example would be like in the Colonial apartment building, right? There's a lot of concerns about activity that happens there, and we've had a neighbor who's come in and said, hey, what is being done to clean up this property? And it's really a combination of things. It involves policing, of course, because there are criminal activities that go on, but it also involves code enforcement. And so simply by that neighbor coming to find out, they found out what is police doing, what is code enforcement doing, what is the city of Billings doing, and right there the channel of communication was opened up in a way that it hadn't been previously.
Well, and you bring an interesting point up too. Just because I may not like something doesn't mean it's illegal, and doesn't mean that it's against code. So that's another thing too, but at least you have a way to hear it instead of thinking you're getting the runaround.
Absolutely, and a lot of times it really is that simple as, this is the law we can enforce, or there is no law to enforce. Maybe you need to lobby the city council to pass a law to enforce it. But that's where you can really find out for yourself what is and isn't possible, direct from the horse's mouth.
Right. So what has been probably the most interesting part of being a part of this advisory board?
Well, we've learned a ton, right? We've learned all the things that are already being done by the police department, which is a lot.
Okay.
And we've learned, what other communities are doing and why that might not work so well here. In the last year, we've really dived into these 4 areas to make an action plan, and really not only thought of all the things that can be done, but helped prioritize really specific goals in each of those areas, so that we're not just throwing out everything under the sun, but of all the ideas discussed, here are the top 2 ideas that we think really will make the biggest impact.
Right. So do it to start, and then you can always do more ideas down the road. That makes sense.
And we're just advisory, so we don't make any decisions.
Right.
We simply advise city council because they don't have the time to dig into these issues in the manner in which we have as citizens, along with Chief St. John and the city administration. So now we've done all that work, we can present that to them in an educated fashion, and they can trust, since they've appointed us to this role, that the recommendations we're providing are, have merit and credibility, and, we've done our research.
One of the things that you mentioned was the whole crime prevention and diversion. I think that's always a challenging one, because obviously if there's a crime going on, it needs to be taken care of. But sometimes maybe you can catch people before they start on a bad path. What sort of ideas would you recommend, or has the committee recommend, to address those?
We've looked at a lot of ideas. Really, the 2 primary places we're looking at right now are around unhoused neighbors and the cost that we spend to enforce laws to put people in a revolving door of ERs and jails. And what else could we do? How could that money be spent differently and more effectively and lead to better outcomes for everyone involved, right? We've also really spent a lot of time digging into the crisis response unit, which there's been a lot of coverage about the startup of that unit, why that unit isn't running anymore, and there really are some concrete ideas that we've come up with that could help that unit be sustainable long term. And what we've seen is just a lot of discussion around why it's not working, and not a whole lot of discussion about what will make it work. And
Right.
so we've taken the time to delve into that, and we've looked at things like increased call volume, policing everywhere and not just only folks who are in their homes, right? So crisis response unit, if it responded to everybody, that changes the nature of those call volumes, right? And it really became something where they were only responding to mental health crisis for people who were housed. So that changes the dynamic, especially when it's a program who's planning on billing Medicaid, and a lot of people who are housed aren't necessarily a Medicaid billable population. So it just meant that the sources they were planning to reimburse with didn't come through the way they intended, on top of the fact that Medicaid is kind of a dicey proposition anyway with the way it's funded. But yeah, really just increasing call volumes, responding to all populations citywide, are simple things that can be done that will help that unit be sustainable long term. And it has a direct impact on police, because if our police are able to even leave a call 2 minutes sooner because there's a crisis response handler there ready to respond instead, that frees up all those police for violent crimes and things that we all want them to be responding to.
Well, and that's always the tricky thing, though, right? Because sometimes if it's a crisis, sometimes things can escalate and become a situation that, involves guns or knives or, deadly force. So that's always the tricky part, isn't it, with this type of service?
Yep, and so right now it's a co-responder model, which means they go out with police.
Okay.
And once the police have deemed that it's safe, then the police just leave the scene that much sooner, as opposed to just staying to respond, because police are the only option to respond.
Right.
So this allows peer support, licensed addictions counselors, mental health therapists to go out along with police when we know the call has come in that somebody might be having a mental health crisis, an emergency, suicidal, things like that. And instead of only responding with men in uniform or humans in uniform, but you would end up having trained professionals in the crisis arena who not only can be there right there in that moment, but they have the ability to follow up afterwards and stay in contact with that person in a way that our police, not only are not equipped to do, but really that's not what their job is. Their job is that safety in the moment.
Well, and when you're talking about these community concerns, obviously mental illness, you mentioned drug abuse, alcohol abuse, people who are living on the streets. I mean, all of these things are beyond really what the police can do. So do you also tie into community resources, or how does that work? When you have, because I hear it all the time. I hear, oh, Billings isn't safe. We're accosted by people downtown, or, I see people who are, high on drugs, driving drunk, whatever. How are things like that addressed, or is that beyond your scope?
No, it's really a multifaceted approach, right? And that's why we weren't told to only look at recruitment and retention of officers, because who wants to work in a community where your only tools are a gun and a badge, right? You want to know that you have resources you can count on when somebody isn't right to go to jail, when somebody isn't right to go to the ER. That right there changes recruitment and retention in the workforce, right? And when you have money to spend on officers, butts and seats, because you didn't spend it in a way that was just this revolving door, that changes the dynamic. And it's more effective, right? For the person who's in crisis, whatever that may be, it could even be simply, I'm too inebriated.
Yeah, sure. Just tonight.
It's not safe for me right now, right?
Right.
Wouldn't we all rather have that police officer off the scene of that and on to the next thing, rather than staying there tied up because we don't have any other choice? Right.
So then this model becomes figuring out the right resource at the right time. I mean, ideally. Obviously, it's not 100%, but that's the ideal solution. And then furthermore, taking it so you're helping prevent some of these things from happening in the first place.
Yep. And where it really comes together as a whole, just at the city, right, is that the dispatchers have police to call on, they have fire to call on. But now they also have a crisis response unit to call on, and in tandem with the fire, they have a medical response team for those folks who maybe have fallen and need help getting up, but we don't need the full ladder truck for. So now we have different levels of service and care that we can provide at different cost effectiveness as well. And it just really frees up the right people to be at the right space at the right time. So that those who are needed for violent crimes, for real serious emergencies, for fires, can be free to do so when that time comes.
Right. Well, what would you say has been the biggest success that you've seen personally?
Well, one of the things we did was a community safety campaign. And so we, about a year ago, we heard everybody saying, like, what can I do? And there was no real concrete answer as to what any average citizen could do to help make their community safer.
Right.
And so we thought, well, let's come up with something from the simplest thing you can do to the most intensive thing you can do. And the safety acronym is where we started, right? And so S is for social engagement, and that's just really following the social media pages. There's things like help us catch the culprit on the Billings Police Department page.
Sure.
That's something anybody can do with very little time investment, and it does help make our community safer. A is for active involvement. There's always some sort of coffee with the chief going on, or safety forums happening. Get involved and really be active and take an active role in it. And instead of hoping somebody else is going to solve it, think, what can I do in my neighborhood to solve it? Maybe it is just bringing something to the attention of the police at the meeting. The F is for face-to-face interactions. So getting to know your neighbors. That really helps when things stand out. Telling your neighbors, hey, come with me to this meeting. Hey, you know what? They're having that chat with the chief over at the coffee shop up the street. Let's go tell them about that house up the street. When more than one neighbor together come and try to solve an issue, you're going to have a lot more traction, right?
And you can look out for each other too, which is really important.
We used to have those neighborhood watches, and they still exist, but it's really changed a lot. And so this is kind of the modern day twist on a neighborhood watch, face-to-face engagement. And then of course we've got the E, which is education and training, and then the T is also related to training, but they have a police academy that you can take, which is a 6-week course where you can really learn every single thing that police do. And then you can come back around and be on an alumni board and be more engaged that way, or you can even volunteer at the Community Service Crime Prevention Center. And so those are great opportunities where people who want to be more involved than just clicking on social media can take a role. And the Y is really simply you. It's you, it's me, it's all of us. It takes us all working together to make our community safe. And if we all do something, what would our community look like? And that's really what it's about. It's about empowering average everyday citizens to take a role in their community, to do something, whatever it is you feel you can do. I'm a disabled only parent. I have a lot of limitations, and this is something that I can do. So that's what that safety campaign is about, is to just help people plug in somehow, some way, to do something to make our community safer.
So what inspired you to get involved with this group?
I got involved really on a different resolution. It was the Energy and Conservation Commission at the City of Billings. We passed that, it's probably been about 6 or 7 years ago now. And that committee helped save the City of Billings $815,000 in electrical costs alone.
Wow.
So, you
That's
think
impressive.
These things don't make a difference, but they do.
Right.
And so when, community members kind of had the same idea as to wow, what about policing? There was a lot of talk at the time around deadly officer-involved shootings, and Billings was not immune to that. We were actually 9th per capita in the country at that time for deadly police shootings. We had over 20 at that point, and more than half of them were people of color. So there was a lot of community discussion about what are we going to do? What role can we take? And there was a need to bring folks from all different sides of the issue together to help come up with something, again, anything that we could do differently. And so we had a steering committee, and I helped kind of lead that work. And that steering committee really decided that what we wanted to do was to create a Citizen Police Advisory Board. And we passed a resolution. It's a time-limited 4-year resolution, really to show that there's a reason to have this board, not to just have a board to meet for no reason.
Sure.
But after this 4 years, I think we will demonstrate that there's a lot that can be done between citizens and police for very little cost investment. It's cost next to nothing. I just really wanted to provide a place for citizens to be involved, and that's kind of my role. I'm a community organizer. I like to bring together people with different viewpoints and show them we're not all that different. Here's the places we align, and here's where we can even move together.
Well, and there's a lot of value in having people from the community talking to the police, because you're going to learn things aside from the crime that's happening. You're going to learn, oh, this is, it used to be the days, and I don't know if they still do it, where you have the beat police that walked a certain neighborhood. They knew what was going on. And these days, police running around on, they're super busy.
Yes.
So it's a different world now. And it's probably really important to have that outlet between the community and the police.
It really is. I mean, it changes the dynamic entirely because it gives citizens a place where they feel that their voice is heard, and it also gives police a place to have the discussion that isn't a highly politically charged environment. It's just a conversation between two human beings who care about an issue.
Right, right. Well, one of the things that I know is a concern is the rising crime rate. It seems like when Billings experienced all the people moving in from all around the country, that crime started rising in addition. Is that something that's improving, or is the community group helping with that at all?
Yeah, you know, that really comes to that data collection and analysis piece. So we see the annual reports. They're put out by the police every year. They're fantastic. They give you all the data on use of force and personnel and all the things, right? But sometimes there's data that isn't being collected or isn't being collected in a way that's accessible to the public. And so these are some of the things that we've been working really on directly as to, for example, at the city level. Of course, we don't deal with anything outside policing and we don't deal with anything beyond the city. But if you were to look at municipal crimes alone, and from the moment that they're dispatched to what units are dispatched to were they taken to jail, were they charged, were they released with or without bond, at what point in the process, and how did that end? If we had the ability to look at that as a whole and sample, you know, say crime area by crime area, substance use or domestic violence. We hear a lot about domestic violence. What would it look like if we had a data system that could actually track everything from the moment that it's dispatched all the way to the way when it's adjudicated? Now, of course, we can't do that between the city and the county because those systems don't talk to each other. But why couldn't we do it at the city with the municipal court judges and the city attorney and the Billings Police Department? Those are all city staff. If city council wanted them all to have a system that works together, they could do that. Other cities certainly do. But it's not as cut and dry as just saying this is what we want. We want to try to figure out what does that look like? What are the barriers that prevent that? And, you know, one of them is just simply the officer entering the data.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
You have to train them all to do that, and so you bring in a new system.
And then they're busy, they're on to the next call. And
right, and so is it really helping us in the long term to have less crime when we have to transition to a whole new way of keeping data? And so we've really been weighing, you know, what's the benefit and the risk and the reward. And it ultimately isn't up to us. All we can do is present our findings to the city council. But now they've got some research and some data and some citizen engagement behind it to say, well, this is the, you know, constituent in my ward who asked me for this. Or we can say, you know, when members of the public come, we can say, we had someone come to our meeting and ask us specifically about the colonial apartment. And that is why it's in our recommendations in our action plan.
Sure. So was there any big aha from trying to collect more data and analyzing it that you came to?
The aha is it's very difficult.
Oh, okay. That's
it's
fair.
a lot more difficult than the average person thinks.
Right.
You know, there's no perfect system.
Right.
So even if we got a new system, which is extremely expensive to do, it's going to have its own hiccups, the same as the system we have now. And so there's no perfect. But there are better ways, and so really it's just about trying to figure that out and weigh out, you know, how much time are we spending versus being on the streets with violent criminals.
Right, right. Well, obviously, at the end of the day, people need to be safe and protected when there is something happening with a crime.
Yep.
How can we get to the point where the crimes aren't happening as much? And I don't have an answer for that, of course, but you know, that's the bigger question.
Right. Well, and that's where you look at all of these things together. Because if we prevent crime and we divert people out of the system that require police to respond, that frees up time that they might be able to get training on how to re-enter data a different way.
Sure.
Or that frees up time that they could go respond to violent crime. Once we know they're responding to all the violent crime and the property crime, those crimes that have victims who are harmed, right? And they have time to respond to mental health crisis and substance use with victims who are primarily the people in the crisis themselves, then we know, okay, they have the time to look into training on data entry or training on a new system or even training on de-escalation and trauma-informed care, things like that. They do all of that, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of training that our officers have on how to handle crisis, more than they should have to have, because really, it's a public safety position. It's not a mental health counselor. But they really have had to take on a lot of that role as officers in our community, and so they've had to take on a lot of training as well to be equipped for that role.
Well, I never thought about that. Really, they have to be trained in multiple different aspects of working with the public, from, I guess, advocates for the public to mental health crisis to drug abuse to, of course, the criminal, which we always think police enforcing crimes. That's what we think of, but they have a bigger role than I would have thought at first glance.
They really do, and one thing that the police department has done well is to think about how can we fill these roles in different ways. So some officers, they want to be doing that violent crime response. They are great at responding in an emergency. SWAT officers are a great example of that, right? Some officers get on the beat and they realize, I really enjoy dealing with the public, but not in that capacity, and they end up becoming community service officers. Some folks end up being administrative. You know, some have went from being police officers to head of code enforcement. Tina Hoger's a great example of that. And so the city of Billings, what they do really well is that they have a lot of variety of roles for people to fill into now that involve policing, but don't have to only be in uniform, you know, with handcuffs and guns and tasers, right? They could do all sorts of jobs that involve policing that feel very rewarding every single day, but they don't have to get in the thick of it if they don't want to. And if they want to, there are plenty of jobs for that as well. And so I really like the way that we've thought about policing differently and given a lot of opportunities for people of diverse backgrounds to come in and add their skills to that force and fit in a place where it makes sense for them. And it gives us just, again, those dispatchers a different layer of ways to send help out to the community. And it doesn't always require an officer in uniform.
Well, so this is a volunteer position for you and the other people on the committee. What inspired you to become involved?
Well, I'm a mom. I'm raising a kid here. I grew up in this community and graduated from Billings West High School a few decades ago. But, you know, it's not the same community that it was when I grew up here. And it's really hard to think about raising a child in this community the way that it is now. And I'm not the type to sit back and say, gosh, I wish it was better. I'm the type to do something about it. And this is my way of taking action. And, you know, there's 6 other community members who come every single month with me, and we all put our heads together. Again, we have very diverse backgrounds and beliefs and come from really different perspectives, but we all agree that it takes all of us to make the community safer, and we're all putting our heads together as to where can we find common ground that is a great place to move forward, that we think the city council, you know, would be interested in. Things that they're already talking about, or specifically they told us, here's the areas we want you to focus on. And so that's really helpful because we're really staying within the scope of what we know they want. And we're not coming up with things that are so far afield that, you know, aren't even going to be considered.
Right, well, and it can get too big of a project at that point. So it does make sense that you're focused. And now remind us again, if people have a concern, a community concern related to policing, where can they send their concern, or how can they get their concern addressed?
So we meet on the 4th Thursday of every month, and it's at the new City Hall, which is, I think, I don't know the exact address, I apologize, but it's the big white building downtown on 26th, I want to say. And so it's on the 5th floor in the conference room there, and that's every month. You can always reach out to the police department. They're very open to communication and transparency and dialogue, and so that's always a good start. And if it's something that belongs with the Police Advisory Board, Chief St. John will make sure it gets to us. But we also on the city website do have at billingsmt.gov/safety is where our safety campaign lives. And that's where you can find more information about the board, about the safety campaign, ways to get involved. And, you know, there's also from there a link to the Citizen Police Advisory Board page with a list of all the members, the resolution that helped us get established, and all of that information, including what I said about where we meet and the times.
Well, wonderful, Kari. This has been so informative, and I'm sure everybody is going to learn so much from your visit with us today. And everybody, we appreciate you watching, and we hope to see you next time on All About Billings.